Wanted to extend a very warm welcome to our 5th anniversary Fireside chat. The topic today is creating perfect flow in supply chains. And I'd like to start by introducing our special guest, chess grandmaster and best-selling author, Gary Kasparov. Gary, it's a pleasure to have you here with us.
Thanks for inviting me.
And of course, I'd also like to introduce our esteemed customer panel. Like we were just discussing, it's been a momentous 5 years. And of course, we couldn't have done any of this without the close collaboration of our customers and our partners. And of course, our dogged determination to put some value on the board in new, meaningful ways. So with that, I'd like to quickly introduce Danielle Maurici Arnon. She is the CIO of North America for Reckitt Benckiser Health and Nutrition. Very welcome to you, Danielle.
Hi, Gaurav.
George Chimukov, the Vice President of Customer Service and Logistics from the Kellogg Company. Hi, George.
Hey, great to be here.
Mark McIntyre, the Senior Vice President of Operations from Transplace. Welcome, Mark.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
And last but not the least, Jay Koganti, the Vice President of Supply Chain COE from Estee Lauder.
Hi, guys. Good to be here.
Hand this over to Steve, a quick introduction of the Noodle panel as well. We have Steve Pratt, our CEO, our fearless leader. Hi, Steve.
Hello.
We've got Mike Hulbert, the Vice President of Consumer Business at Noodle.ai. Mariah, how are you? She is our Vice President of Product, and a big welcome to the entire panel. So to kick this off, let me hand this to Steve.
Thanks, everyone. A big welcome. This is a really important occasion for Noodle, and that's our 5-year anniversary. And we're especially excited to announce a new category of business software that we've been developing for the 5 years now. That is really focused on restoring flow in supply chains and factories. That we're seeing tremendous disruptions and seemingly unpredictable events and seemingly random things that are happening in supply chains that are causing disruptions. And no technology has been able to see through this. And so we're super excited about what we've been able to develop and implement at our customers and really making a big difference in the world to restore flow. It's a collaboration between some of the most advanced machine intelligence and really powerful human intelligence collaborating together to really reduce waste in the world, to restore flow, specifically the flow of products, cash flow, and team flow. Right, the way that planners operate and make a difference. And we're super excited about this. The problems that are created by these unpredictable events is about a $2 trillion problem in the world economically. There's trillions of tons of industrial waste that are produced because of this, and we're super excited about flow and flow operations finally being able to identify this waste, to target the waste, and to eliminate it like has never been possible before. And on this occasion, we're incredibly honored to have our special guest to kick us off as Garry Kasparov, who most people would say is the best chess player ever in the history of humanity, and was the #1 ranked player in the world for 20 years. That's had the record for being the youngest top player in the world. And for me, equally importantly, is his passion for new ideas and embracing progress in humanity. And I encourage you to buy all of his books and to read them all. They're all amazing. So specifically Deep Thinking, which talks about the collaboration between machine intelligence and human intelligence. And I would invite Gary to talk for a few minutes about this on this special occasion, and we're honored to have you, Gary.
Thank you, Steve, and hello, everyone. I'm Gary Kasparov, and I'm happy to welcome you on behalf of Noodle.ai today. I'm sorry we cannot be together in person now. or anywhere in person. But be assured that is really me, Gary Kasparov, and not a deep fake or AI. As you may know, I had a bumpy entrance into the field of machine intelligence. As the world chess champion, I was the first knowledge worker to have my job threatened by a machine. My two famous matches against the IBM supercomputer Deep Blue in 1996 and in 1997 did a lot to promote AI and chess, even if Deep Blue was only as intelligent as your alarm clock. Not that losing to a $10 million alarm clock made me feel any better. But every loss teaches us lessons if we are willing to learn and to adapt. After all, that is what humans are so best at. So after licking my wounds and ruminating about the future of chess and humanity, I decided if you cannot beat them, join them. And I began my journey of investigating into human plus machine, how we can get the most, not just from AI, but also from rapidly increasing number of people who work with it. That is the key, how to center people in the equation. Otherwise, we will fail at the one thing only humans can do, which is to set priorities, to know what matters most, what really counts. Artificial intelligence, or augmented intelligence, as I strongly prefer to call it, is not independent from us. Like all of our technologies throughout history, AI is neither good nor evil. It is not a harbinger of utopia or dystopia. Instead, think of AI as a mirror, reflecting its creators, us. And since we cannot take our needs and biases out, we have to look at the big picture from the start, from the very start, to make sure we're moving in the right direction. In the early days of AI, back in the late 1960s and 1970s, computers were very, very slow, and data collection was limited. With few users, AI pioneers had plenty of time to think about theory, about philosophy, about how their creations might impact society in the future, once they were functional. Today, the situation has flipped. AI is a tool of tremendous power. Data collection and the processing is staggering and increasing at a geometric rate. It is so useful and so profitable that little time is left, or little time is taken to consider what it means for society. And much of that discussion is unfortunately wasted on fear-mongering about Terminators, Matrix, or other forms of fully automated dystopias. That is what interested me so much when I heard about Noodle.ai. It is the principle of using these incredible AI tools to solve problems that are damaging our quality of life, not just damaging the bottom line of our businesses. This is the positive future for AI and of the human-machine relationship. It is a future of data crunching and pattern finding by the machines. It is a future of creativity and strategic leadership by us, the humans. That is the future. One of the philosophers of AI, one of the AI pioneers, Joseph Weizenbaum, described nearly 50 years ago. In his book, Computer Power and Human Reason, he wrote that machines could decide algorithmically, but only humans could choose. We can choose to use these remarkable tools to make our lives better, to make our world better. We can choose to center our shared humanity when we design and use these tools. And of course, we can choose to be here today to talk about it. Thank you. And Noodle.ai and I hope that you will enjoy the rest of the program.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, and I'm sure we'll find a lot of interesting parallels between what you just said and playing chess and managing supply chains. Very, very complex. So the first set, and I'd like to spend a few minutes before we jump into the details of the what and the how, and Steve kind of talked about flow ops and explainable AI. I wanted to, collectively with this panel, spend a few minutes acknowledging the why, right? The section's called Hindsight 2020. And we know volatility has been the nemesis of all supply chain systems for a long time. So, George, I'll start with you, and Mark, I'll come to you next. George, before we get into the actual mechanics of what we are doing, I'd like to get your perspective on volatility. You are managing not just a critical, but a highly volatile food supply chain. And of course, as customer service, you've taken an end-to-end view to product flow from the very start. Could you spend a few minutes and just kind of give us, what were some of the lessons learned over the previous years of 2020, of course, being the crescendo? What have been some of the lessons learned that you think are here to stay? And, some of your frustrations with the status quo, if you will. If you could.
Yeah. Well, thanks. So, it was put forward by Warren Bennis and Bert Nanas several years ago. We live in a VUCA world, right? VUCA, defined by them, was volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, which I don't know about you, but that defines 2020 to a T, right? So that's what we lived through. I don't know, they had a lot of foresight when they put that out there. And I think what we learned was agility was critical to reacting to that world, right? So we, in making decisions, pivoted quickly in what we could affect. We simplified our portfolio to maximize the amount of food we could ship to customers, because demand vastly exceeded our ability to supply. But we sacrificed service because we basically sold our inventory. So we were in a desperate situation. We made a lot of rapid fire decisions to enable production, to ship directly to customers from even our factories where we normally ship from DCs. And we obviously fought to make sure that we had a secure supply of raw materials coming in. What really was the insight is we needed to structurally improve our rapid decision-making all the time. We were very good at it in Q2 when the big push of COVID surge of volume shifted. The real issue is, how do we make rapid decision-making the new normal? I think that's our big takeaway from last year.
Similarly, Mark, of course, from the perspective of transportation management, you guys are the last mile, trying to deal with all this volatility and get that customer service where you want it to be. What have been some of your experiences in the past and lessons that you think are not going to go away?
I don't think it's wildly different than what George said. There's a lot of V words being thrown around: volatility, velocity, visibility, all very important for sure. I would say 2020 really highlighted some areas for us that we were very intentional about early on and have kind of kept that cadence and pace over the last 12 months. And one of those areas is just being extremely intentional about how we engage and the frequency of those engagements, not only internally, but externally facing with our customers. I was a road warrior before 2020, as were all of the people on my team. We believed, and it's in our DNA, that we want to be in front of our customers all the time. And so we had to really pivot that philosophy. And I've been on more Zoom, team meetings, go-to meetings, you name it, and feel like I'm as connected as I ever was, even though I've not been anywhere. And then we put a lot of metrics and a lot of thought around productivity measures, because we all pivoted to working from home. And it was very top of mind for us to make sure that the productivity wasn't faltering because of that new environment. And then the last thing I would say is I often will say, if you're not innovating, you're eventually going to die. And so innovation is really, really critical, and we've invested a lot in innovation. But that doesn't come without its challenges. There's a lot of fear of failure, and supply chain, more so than ever, has made its way into the boardroom. And so there's a real sense of fear of missing out, but also fear of failure. And people want others to go first, and they want case studies around those initiatives or innovation, if you will. And so that's been our challenge. And I think certainly working from home and COVID has made that more challenging, because it's you just cannot articulate that over a Zoom meeting or whatever as well as I think you might could in person. So lots of focus on innovation, visibility with reporting and productivity, but also just learning how to be intentional about connecting.
Very good. And Daniel, for health and nutrition of obviously from a volatility perspective is right up there as well. And as the CIO, what were some of your learnings and in particular, maybe some of your frustrations with legacy, tech would be great to hear.
Sure. I think first off, my best friends for 2020 were my supply chain partners. So we were joined at the hip, probably no surprise. George, you probably had that experience as well. And certainly within our categories, very similar to yours, the demand was just unprecedented. So I think this notion that supply is a strategic differentiator and how do we, develop the building blocks to make that true and to be able to deliver on the promise that we're going to be best in class, that we're going to first and foremost really put the consumer needs front and center, because that is really, I think the biggest lesson is what do consumers need now? What is their expected channel in which they're going to desire to consume those products? And how do we meet that expectation in a continuous and virtuous cycle? Mark was mentioning, this idea of you have to keep learning. Mm-hmm. So I think the gaps that came up around that decision intelligence and the process that the planners have historically followed, that is based on this kind of fallacy of it's going to be accurate. Everyone knew emotionally that it was inaccurate. And the adrenaline that the planners were running on for months and months and months, I think created a lot of anxiety about the efficacy of the data. And in absence of having the right tools in place, that actually added to, a lot of the stress that we had to meet those service levels as has been discussed. And, really maintain the credibility of the brands, because people want to see the brands that they love most on the shelf. And the desire for certain products was much higher than for other products. And being able to switch that context, I think there is a very human element to that, because we were all experiencing the change in our behaviors and could validate on a human level, okay, yeah, I don't really think that this item in my pantry is the hugest priority right now. So you could start to make human judgments. But the problem that we faced is, it's the speed in which you can make those judgments, and where that gap in having the tools and the visibility and those choices being very action oriented is where we saw the opportunity to move out of some of the legacy processes, systems, and into more of the modern tools that we'll be talking more about today.
And Jay, when you come to beauty and cosmetics, especially in the prestige segments, of course, the volatility is extreme. And specifically with Estée, it's a very, very complex supply chain, which kind of spreads across the globe, of course, with large number of organizationally complex, supply chains. What has been your experience?
I think it is consistent with all the fellow panelists, what they said, the why they all started journey. I think we are in a similar boat. I think our initial use case is complexity, right? We have inherent complexity coming from the portfolio, the channel mix, changing consumer preferences, right? They're all kind of amplifying for the last couple of years. Even I think we started our initiative pre-COVID, right? Then COVID comes, suddenly there's a volatility is a big multiplier, right? So one of the observation is traditionally we put a lot of buffers against volatility, whether it's a safety stocks, your pre-bills, postponement, a lot of different strategies. But when your volatility is at 10x, none of them could really, support to run the business the way we want to. So I think we are very confident about investments we did and also in the direction we're heading. One thing is very clear: when you have the large data sets, a lot of micro outliers, human intelligence needs a lot of augmentation. It's very hard to look at all the factors coming in, how they influence. I think one thing is clear: without this kind of technology that could prioritize, augment, right, human intelligence, it could have been much worse, right? So we're glad to make those investments prior to COVID, and we were able to leverage during the COVID time.
Kudos to RB, Kellogg's, Transplace, Estee Lauder in leadership and innovation. I mean, I think that taking something that is very, very complicated and applying which is relatively new technology. I mean, this technology could not have existed 10 years ago. The computers weren't fast enough, data was too expensive, and it just wouldn't make any sense. But to show the leadership to do this is really important. Certainly from a supply chain world, from a technology world, but also from a humanity, right? Of helping reduce waste in the world and help the economy grow and all those good things is really important. So I want to commend your leadership.
And I think there are direct parallels to what Gary was saying earlier. There's managing supply chains is like playing multidimensional chess, and there are a lot of parameters that go into this. And George, I'll come back to you. Moving on from the common why and the frustrations of what we've had as tools to deal with this. You're the vice president of customer service and logistics, and I know for a fact that you've always taken an end-to-end product flow view to supply chains, all the way from materials to shelf. Could you kind of expand on, some of the limitations that you experienced in the past trying to manage end-to-end product flows, and more importantly, getting into the what and how? How has this experience evolved once you've added flow ops and explainable AI type of capabilities to your digital mix?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, agility was our big unlock, and what we learned through all of last year's volatility. But yet, how do you build the capabilities within your organization, and what tools can you employ to enhance your agility? And primarily agility in decision making, right? And a rules-based system is only as good as the rules or constraints that you embed in those decision-making algorithms. What we found was we needed to do something different. And I used a football analogy, which I think is appropriate here. The supply chain typically is like the offense, trying to drive the ball, deliver it to the customer in the end zone, score a touchdown. The problem is you have a defense standing between you and your objective. The defense represents volatility, either in supply or demand. And, a lot of pro football teams will have a standard set of plays, 15 to 20 plays already mapped out on what they're due. That's the forecast. The problem is those never withstand the first contact with the enemy, right? So the best teams maybe have Tom Brady as their quarterback, and Tom Brady is outstanding at reading the defense, understanding the variability that's going to be coming to his team's way and stopping them from proceeding and making the adjustment. Well, the artificial intelligence that we've employed from Noodle does exactly that. Although instead of being Tom Brady, which would have been cool to have on our team, the artificial intelligence is whispering in the planner's ear and making a recommendation on what to do. And the adoption isn't immediate, but as planners listen to that advice, and it's right more often than it's wrong, far more, we begin to have far better outcomes. So we've been excited with the progress that we've seen and the benefits we've seen in improving service, even while we've been running with very limited inventory levels. So we've seen significantly higher service at low weeks of supply that we've never been able to achieve in the past.
It's very good. And you've always kind of taken a view that you cannot solve this just, through deployments or by controlling demand. And you're a big proponent of kind of pushing this all the way down to production and materials.
Accept the volatility, just deal with it, right? I think that's what we have to learn with. We could complain about the forecast, right? What's the old saying? The forecast is the one guaranteed thing to be wrong, right? So the question is, how do you make it so adaptable, so poka-yoke, where it's mistake proof that you can react to it and still succeed and get that touchdown?
Daniel, coming to you. As you've seen this unfold and as you've added, with digital control towers, this explainable AI capability to your digital mix, how has that experience improved or evolved for you?
I think it's the sense and predict, right? So having a very rich demand signal helps you understand more possibilities. And this is where the blind spots of the planner are, very, very damaging, right? So if you have to wrangle all that data manually, and by the time, you've gathered the information to try to make a hypothesis about what's going on, it's too late. So the ability to kind of do that sensing, to invest in, gathering the multiple data sources that you need for it to become intelligent, and then to shift into the predictive mode to help drive, different decisions and scenarios that, as Gary was saying, it's not possible, and Jay, to generate those from just a purely, human perspective. So it's the blend of the two to get the sense and the predict, really, and that cadence flowing. And I think we can't forget about the planner and the relationship between the planner and the consumer, as I think that's ultimately how we eliminate waste, is to join up the human intelligence about what is needed and how to best deliver that in the most efficient way. And that efficiency comes from drawing the intelligence on the plan side and then on the execution side, because by the time the execution side comes, it's too late because you've missed all of the different scenarios and variables along the way. So I think that's really the how piece for us, is bringing that to life and having the data visualization and giving those tools to the planners so that they feel empowered.
Very true. And you raised some very, very interesting points. And for us to really put value on the board, it's important, obviously, to get our product flows back in flow, but it's the aspect that you talked about, the human aspect, the team flow, is super important. And Jay, as one of our longest standing customers, you've been part of that. You've seen that entire journey play out over a few years now. Could you share some real life stories and examples of how this value was put on the board, and some of your experiences in making sure that the team flows were in check, and how you kind of kept the human front and center of this transformation? It'd be great if you can share some stories.
Yeah, as mentioned earlier, I think we started 2 years back our journey. The main why is, I think Gary pointed out early on, prioritization, right? When we looked deep into our supply chain, so we were dealing with, anywhere between 500,000 to 1 million exception messages, right? Coming across the different regions, geographies, etc. So I think our initial goal was how to prioritize, give focus to the planners. That's where we started our journey, right? I think over a period, we realized ERP systems, right, being deterministic, there's a little bit of a false compliance comes from the ERP system, right? Actually, by building these capabilities, one, I think what we did over the past couple of years, one, predict, right? It's a better mousetrap, how to predict, right? That's where the AI machine learning is helping tremendously. Then action recommendations, we want, augmentations to the planner intelligence, different choices, right? Expedite or prepone, right? Different choices, systematically getting those action recommendations. Then the third step is measuring the action effectiveness, right? How well our plan is actually executing it, so that it actually feedbacks into the learning model, right? Those are the 4 steps, very simple, basic. We started with it. And one of our biggest learning is, as a corporation, most of us want to march to a drumbeat of one plan. We don't want to have too many plans, so one plan. At the same time, anticipate there could be different outcomes, because there's a different things evolving constantly. And keeping those scenarios and possibilities with a probabilistic mindset is the biggest shift what we made, right? Again, still we're going through the journey, but that's a new way of thinking, new mindset that is completely different from what we used to do in the past.
Mark, from a transportation management perspective, obviously there have been a lot of changes coming in, some more recent than others, in terms of penalties and requirements from retailers to meet, certain OTIF benchmarks. And all of this adds to the business case. The business case adds up very, very fast. It's not just the fill rates at the outbound DCs, but it's also penalties. And of course, from an overages perspective, there's a tremendous amount of capital that gets locked into inventory and write-offs. What has been your experience managing to some of these stringent requirements coming in from retailers like Walmart?
2020, other than the global pandemic, I'm not sure there's a hotter topic than OTIF. It monopolizes so many of our hours of the day, and in 2020 we delivered 400,000 shipments into Walmart for a lot of global iconic brands, RB and Kellogg's being two of them. There's lots of ways we try to approach that collaboration. Like there's no unlock here just inside the transportation services box. It takes collaboration across multiple functional teams. And I know, each of the other panelists are definitely doing that. Two things I think of that we've invested in and done that has really helped in those veins are, and AI has been, front and center on both of those. And one is shippers who have truckload capacity will typically win. Capacity wins. And so one of the very first things we did with Noodle was take all the data that we sit on, and we sit on a mountain of data. And over time, we have found lots of opportunities in our network of 11 billion of freight under management to tie capacity together. And so previously you would have a lane going from Atlanta to Chicago, and then we would lose visibility of that truck. Now using AI Noodle, we are tying those together in a big way. We certainly call that dynamic continuous moves. I think it's one of the most overpromised, under-delivered initiatives in supply chain history, and we're doing it in a big way, and it's powered by Noodle.ai. And so that's a newfound way of providing capacity to our customers.
The notion of value is very, very important. This is a new technology, didn't exist more than a few years ago. And I think creating belief within the team is a very, very important part of putting some value on the board. So my question to the panel, and feel free to answer. And George, maybe you can start with you in the context of really putting value and a business case that the CFO's office can sign off on and say, yes, you've helped us cash this check. I know nobody has spent more time and attention on that than Kellogg. So could you maybe expand on what you believe are the ingredients of getting to that value and getting cash flows back to where you'd like them to be? What are some of the components and some of the experiences you've had in putting real value?
So our global head of supply chain, is quoted often saying, whatever we do is not a social experiment. So, right, what we're trying to do is actually improve business outcomes. And so while service in and of itself is a great thing, it's more important to focus on how are you delivering cash flow, or how are you delivering a lower cost structure, and then service becomes a complementary justification for whatever you're doing. So to me, focusing on those hard benefits overcomes the barriers where people will say, well, what's 1% more case fill worth in terms of more sales? And then you need sales to agree to the added target of 1%. It becomes a very complicated argument or discussion to justify the initiative. So my recommendation would be to focus on those hard benefits that you can get, but also, as Danielle mentioned, partnering with your key resources. So the CIO of your company is critically important. They control the infrastructure that you use to implement any type of new tool, and they typically will not just agree to adding any other bolt-on software because it adds cost to their cost structure. So making sure you have a good relationship, partnership, and understanding of what your strategy is, what you're trying to accomplish is critically important between supply chain and your IT leaders in order to have a successful outcome. And then, of course, building the business case with your finance team.
And Jay, what are some of your thoughts in terms of driving towards better cash flows, keeping team flows and product flows in mind? And I know you as well are thinking about this not just as customer service and fill, but all the way back to kind of tackling critical ingredients. What has your experience been in ensuring all of that comes together?
So I concur with George's comments, right? I think the business value proposition should be centered within the corporation, right? Why we're doing it. Can be lab experiment, right? I think definitely the what if and the customer surveys, those are the starting point. That's where we started our journey as well. One other important aspect is more qualitative, right? When you look at planners' effectiveness, especially in a very complex and volatile supply chain, planners' effectiveness, there's limitations, right? Also, there's a little bit of a social aspect, is a work-life balance. I think a lot of planning community, especially COVID times, there's tremendous stress, not being in office, right? Working remotely, right? There's sometimes the barriers, way to cut off office to, back to life, right? So those aspects are also important, right? So I think we are measuring, I think it's more than a year. We started doing the PPIs and KPIs. We're measuring both sides. We're measuring, what is the what if, gains, right? Also effectiveness of the planner's decisions, right? The both ends we're doing it. Now we're also seeing some opportunity in other areas beyond what if, right? To Gaurav, to you, what you mentioned, there's a different sides of supply chain, like the ingredients, for example, right? There's an opportunity there.
And I think the operative term is augmentation, and it goes back to what Gary Kasparov was also saying, this interplay of humans and machines. And none of this succeeds till your teams are in a state of flow. And we always call it, that's the productivity. It's not more with less, it's more with the same. And it's how do you unlock this force multiplier, which is our people. Daniel, any thoughts you'd like to share on how this journey unfolding with FlowOps and explainable AI has kind of taken that into account? It's a very, very important part that planners believe in the tool, and adoption is a very, very central theme as we kind of roll these out. Any thoughts on that interplay and the importance of keeping planners in mind as you kind of roll these capabilities out?
Yeah, I think this idea that collaboration has heightened, during the crisis, and sales and supply and technology have been all joined up, has really been an incredible opportunity that we're going to keep building on. From the point of view of the planner, working under these stressful conditions and, feeling all that pressure day in and day out, we want to get them into a state of flow, and we want them to feel supported, and we want them to believe that we have confidence in what their recommendations are, and to be able to really, and I think it was George that mentioned this, everybody get on the same page with what the forecast is. You may not like it, but we have to all kind of get onto the same page so that we can drive the decisions moving forward. So I think that empathy with the planner is hugely important, because they become the tip of the spear for all the things that we're talking about doing, and adopting those tools has to, I think, be in the context of multiple other things that are happening within that context and within the framework that they have already developed through S&OP and digital control towers and things of that nature. So we have very, very active working relationships with the planners, and we put ourselves in those shoes. We have a whole day in the life of the planner that we've been working on. And we think about all the different decision points and how to amplify those decision points.
All right, I believe we have some questions coming in from the audience. Do you want to
tee that up? I just wanted to make one comment first, just on what we've been talking about here. I've heard a lot of terms like adaptability, planner empowerment, things like that, right? And it goes back to, in my mind, the great thing about AI, right, and how we've kind of set up our framework for AI. AI in its nature is adaptable, right? It's able to learn. Like, I look at the customers we have on this call, and all of your supply chains, all of your portfolios are very different, right? But yet we're able to leverage AI to solve those. But when it comes to planners, right, that's a second piece. I remember sitting down with some of the planners at Estee Lauder at the very beginning, and just my mind literally being blown by how many screens in SAP they'd be clicking through to try to get to the answer to one question at one DC location for one product, right? And so I think that a core piece of like how we think about leveraging AI to help and empower those planners to make those decisions that drive value is extremely important in terms of how we surface and how we fit it into the processes that each one of you guys have today, so that it's really empowering those planners and not kind of holding them back in terms of being able to understand, interpret the AI, and figure out how to take action. So I just wanted to kind of comment on that because it's something that we've been thinking about a lot, and kind of hearing you guys talk about it, it resonates. Got a good question coming in and around, really about how to get started with AI. The question here is about, where you guys have started on the kind of product flow pathway between, demand, shipping, distribution, materials, requirements planning, et cetera. And I don't know if one of you want to jump in and just talk a little bit about how you've gotten started with AI and how you think about the different places, where it can apply.
So I think at least our experience is, everyone agrees that AI is the most consequential technology for supply chain in this century, right?
I think one thing we looked at is where can the insight given by the AI be most readily applied? So what we saw was our aggregate forecast for North America was actually fairly good at predicting total demand. But when you broke it down into the 7 or 8 distribution centers that we ship from, the disaggregation created a lot of variability. So if we could apply it to how we deployed the food, it would be a quick win, where you have to put in a lot of rules and changeover cleanups when you move upstream into manufacturing. Once the food is made, the question is, where does it go? And I think that was the first application that we chose. And of course, we'll move upstream as we develop our muscle of our AI muscle. But right now, we're excited by what we've seen just in getting deployment right and eliminating the costs of redeploying, which is something we inevitably need to do.
How does adding flow ops and explainable AI kind of front load some of the acceleration you get up front? Because it allows you, it's all about data, it's about humans, and it's about solving some of the hairiest problems, but we can move in very, very quick ways. And I think the term that was brought up earlier was adaptability. So I'd love to, have the audience get the experience of your benefits on how you've added flow ops as a capability, which almost accelerated your journey upfront, while some of the underlying platforms took time to kind of roll out. Any thoughts and experiences there or advice?
I'll tell you what I was excited about. We went from a contract and engagement in late 2019, and normally when you do a SAP or Oracle implementation, it takes 18 months, right? That's typically the time it takes to execute the ability of doing something. We were ready to go in April. So in 4 months' time, we were ready to engage engines. The problem was COVID hit right at that time, so we paused for a time while we worked through the trauma of COVID last second quarter. But we re-engaged in midsummer and quickly drove to value. So I think when you look at the speed of being able to deliver value, I think that was very exciting versus a traditional rules-based implementation.
I think, Gaurav, also, back-end systems are typically not architected to be very flexible. And, the focus that we've all kind of discussed around speed is where, augmentation with AI becomes critically important. But the one thing that I would stress in sort of, what did it take and what were the building blocks that you set forward in the beginning is really having a set of business questions and confidence that you have the data to answer those questions. Some of it is really locked up in those ERP systems, but then, there's a lot of other data sources that you need to enrich that. So really taking a concentrated effort and figuring out how your digital data and supply chain systems need to kind of fit together. And then whether you're, layering AI insights on top of that, you have to get the foundation solidified in order for it to really work, because then it becomes, an issue of the quality and the efficacy of the data that's going to give you the result that you want for the productivity.
From our perspective, the flow ops side, right? Really, the denoising comes to top of mind, right? That's where we started our journey as well. But one other thing I think recently we are very excited about is the noise that matters as well, right? There could be every outlier we know, there is a hidden trend, right? So the capabilities, some of the capabilities you guys are bringing, the BI on AI, right? The insights coming out of the AI engines, so that for human consumption, we are super excited about that part. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? We prioritize at the same time. You don't want to ignore what matters.
It's a closed mission. It's a mission at Noodle.ai as well to create a world without waste. And there is a lot of talk around sustainable supply chains, circular supply chains. So I was wanted to get your perspective on how you're seeing all of this come together and obviously helping do good using technologies like AI. Maybe Jay, since this is a topic close to your heart as well, I know, any thoughts on how you are seeing all of this come together, creating a world without waste and obviously creating some sustainable supply chains, which is now everybody knows is a requirement.
I think as we all know, supply chains are biggest drivers for the climate change, right? Greenhouse gases. I mean, a lot of fronts. So there's a big opportunity within the supply chains, right? One area I think again, it's for our collective thinking. A lot of our focus is inside out, right? We look at org efficiency, supply chain efficiency. That's what drives most of the supply chains. Even though we are consumer centric, still it's inside out. So how about turning to outside in, right? If you look at ecology, right? Whether it's a circularity of supply chains, right? Those things, if you put front and center, some of your choices could be different, right? For example, right? We will be looking for same day delivery, right? Expedite something to get to consumer. Is it a right choice if you put ecology at the front and center, right? It could be. It could offer different options.
And Mark, talking about carbon footprints and especially within transportation, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, really important to our CPG customers, but also our manufacturing customers. And I think our application of AI, and I go back to the dynamic continuous moves, that has eliminated lots of miles out of our network. And so you certainly want to report the value back to our customers on a regular basis from just a line haul compression standpoint, because you get a better rate if you're helping the carrier connect the dots. But we've certainly started being more intentional about also calculating the carbon emission that is reduced just by tying those together. In some cases, there's no deadhead miles at all. They unload at a facility, they pick up at the same facility. And, prior to AI, that was very difficult to do with all these disparate networks. But now using Noodle, it's become much easier and quicker.
Daniel, I know this is a topic very close to your heart. Any thoughts you'd like to share?
How can we amplify the strategy and the purpose of the company? I think there's just tremendous opportunity to sustain the innovation that's happening now as a result of COVID and some other things that were maybe started ahead of that in order to achieve those outcomes. Not just the business outcomes, but the outcomes for society.
George, your thoughts around creating a world without waste and how FlowOps is helping?
I think clearly, as we move from deployment into production recommendations, not making food that ends up not being needed is one of the critical things that we're trying to address. In addition to the ones the other panel members mentioned about getting miles off the road and maybe shrinking your inventory so you have smaller buildings that consume energy to exist. So we want to have low to no waste, and unfortunately, that's still a challenge with a product that has a shelf life, and we do donate our food, so we do make sure that it's not thrown away, but still we want to make sure that we're maximizing the food delivered to consumers and waste as little as possible in that process.
For the panel members, as closing statements as we wrap, words of advice to our attendees and audience. on what the journey is about and your key takeaways working with us. It would be great if you could share some closing statements with our audience.
I'm excited, not knowing much about AI other than it beat Gary, way in the past. Having an understanding of how it works, how it's applied, and really what it does to take our junior planners and turn them into advanced planners at a rapid rate, right? So it gives everyone the insight that a 20-year employee who's done this a long time has been able to achieve. That's really kind of exciting. And it's eye-opening to some of our planners and leads to great adoption.
Jay?
Yeah, I think these are best times within the supply chain, right? The agility, resilience, right? These are the typical our strategy speaks. Now it's a time we could, turn them into reality, right? With the technology, not only making, significant impact for the companies we work for, but the overall societal level. So these are the great times for all of us.
Thank you. And Mark?
Supply chain has been a relatively dull space for decades. And we're in the midst of a technology renaissance. And we do a lot of recruiting at universities for supply chain students. And I talk to them about that a lot. It's an exciting time to be in supply chain. And I think artificial intelligence and technology, huge part of that. So I think a lot about the renaissance we're in. And I would just encourage people to embrace it and innovate. Because that's the only way we're going to get moving the ball forward. So,
and Gaurav, if I may, I just want to thank Danielle, George, Mark, Jay, right, for doing this, and again for your leadership and for doing this for your planners, right? I mean, I think it really I think that one of the underappreciated group of people in the pandemic has been planners who are keeping how we feed society, how we fuel society, how we furnish everything, how we keep society running, that they're on the front lines. And it was, I think giving them the right tools to do this is a really big deal. So thank you for doing that.